I cannot believe what just happened.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. JuJu Lewis should just start for Colorado. That's my opinion. Might not be Kevin Borba's of Locked On Buffs. What's the latest on five-star quarterback Jared Curtis? All on today's show. But Kevin, we are not starting with the Buffs today. We're starting with the most unexpected story imaginable right now in college football, given that the spring portal window is less than a month away from opening. Stanford players now have a 30-day window to go into the portal because Troy Taylor has been fired by Andrew Luck, which is a heck of a statement. But you now have a Power 4 ACC head coaching vacancy. What on earth is Stanford going to do now?
Yeah, and might I add, the first firing by a general manager in college football history, I believe, is sort of the notion out there. But yeah, Stanford's in a real tough situation, right? Obviously, there's been a lot of conflicting reports. There was 2 investigations into Troy Taylor. They found that he was abusive towards or used aggressive language and was sort of not a pleasant guy to everyone on staff. It was centered around his treatment towards female staffers, and then another investigation found he was just not a nice guy behind the scenes. That being said, Andrew Luck, he had 2 investigations. Andrew Luck took over, and as of last weekend, Andrew Luck was like, we're riding with Troy Taylor, right? That was the message behind the scenes. And then today, Tuesday this is, he gets fired. And so very rough time to lose your head coach. Obviously, there's no coaching carousel going on right now. Nobody's going to be risky enough to leave a head coaching job at the moment because Stanford spring ball, they're on spring break right now. They start spring ball next week. So all of these guys, coaches, they're all on vacation right now, celebrating, taking a break from being Stanford students, and now they don't have a head coach. And so if you're Stanford, you're kind of going through this process of, okay, we have to hire from within for this year, and then you have to go on a full-on coaching search because realistically, and this point was made on 3 by Andy Staples, the only other program that's hired a coach right before or right during spring was Kansas and Lance Leipold. He was hired on the last day of spring ball for Kansas, obviously because his predecessor had some issues as well. So for Stanford, you look within. I would assume Bobby April gets some sort of interim head coaching label, and then you have to start looking through the country again, which the Stanford job is probably the hardest job to hire for in college football.
Well, that's the interesting angle on this now that there is just a Power 4 head coaching vacancy out there is hide your coordinators or restructure their contracts because, boy, Stanford's going to be going for them, or high-level group of 5 head coaches. I think about, I don't know if Spencer Danielson would leave Boise State, or would Jeff Traylor leave UTSA, or would Ryan Silverfield leave Memphis? You know, I think there's actually a case to be made, Kevin, because, you know, and Andrew Luck is trying to change this for the Cardinal and get them back to what they were, you know, when he was there, which is a perennial college football top 10, 25 team. I don't know how desirable that job is right now. I think that the NIL and portal have not been kind to Stanford over the last several years. They haven't made a bowl game since the COVID year when they went 4-2. Like, this has not been the same Cardinal that you and I grew up with. And so I wonder if you're a high-end coordinator at any major Power 4 institution, do you look at Stanford as an ACC job that you want? Like, I think if Jake Dickert, for instance, were still at Washington State and he were looking at Wake Forest or Stanford, I think he might rather have the Wake Forest job.
Yeah, it's a really tough scenario. So for those of you that don't know, I started my whole sports journalism career. I was on the Stanford beat for Fan Nation, or SI's Fan Nation, right? That year, so David Shaw's final year was my first year. That year, they were just starting to look into NIL and the transfer portal. Like, it had already been around for a year or two, I believe, at the time. They had just started looking into it because their whole thing was, we're going to be Stanford. We're going to entice players with our degree, which, mind you, it's still very uncommon for guys to leave Stanford without a degree. So they do have that. working for them. But Stanford is a little bit behind in the NIL space. They're figuring out the transfer portal because it's Stanford, right? For those of you that don't know, it's one of the best universities in the world, not just America, in the world. So transferring in, going, okay, we want like John Mateer, for instance. Let's pretend, like you said, Washington State head coach gets the job. He probably wants John Mateer to go to Washington State with him. Chances are John Mateer is not getting admitted into Stanford as a transfer from Washington State. That's just how the cookie crumbles. So
because 99% of people in the country that are college students can't get into Stanford.
Right. So it's not easy to get into Stanford. That being said, them hiring Andrew Luck was a step in the right direction of like, hey, we're trying to catch up. And so I think, because there's no athletic director, right? The athletic director is stepping down. Andrew Luck oversees football. He is the god, the power that be. He is Stanford football.
The Senate.
So the Senate, right. He's the from Severance, the board. He is the board. So he runs everything. So he gets a first choice of whoever he wants. That being said, this will determine how the Andrew Luck experience is going to go based on his first hire. And I don't think he planned on making a hire this early. And I think it's an appealing job in a way, because obviously what the history was, but it's also an uphill battle because you're not just going to roll up and be like, let's say Deion Sanders, for instance, to Colorado. Deion Sanders rolled up to Colorado, told all the players to leave, and then brought in 50 transfers. Stanford, I brought in their most transfers this year, and I think the number was like 9 to 11. So it's not common.
Where do they go from a candidate standpoint? Because they don't just look for a great head coach. They're looking for a certain type of guy to run their program. Like, so I don't think Deion Sanders would ever be a fit in the eyes of the Stanford administration, not because he isn't a good guy or that he's not a capable football coach. That's just not the brand of Stanford football that they strive for. So who even are the candidates for this job?
Yeah, I think Deion Sanders would be like a crazy hire for Stanford. Like, for him, it'd be like a challenge, right? I think that'd be the hardest job of his career. That being said, and the reason we're saying Deion Sanders isn't an option for Stanford is he has based his whole program, even at Jackson State, out of the portal, right? And he's not going to get that from Stanford. He's not going to get the support or the clearance that these other programs have given him. So that's why we're saying that. We think Deion could coach anywhere if he wanted to, right? If given the opportunity. You really have to look at, like you said earlier, head coaches probably looking to make a move from the G5 or coordinators. And you could also look at a guy like Chris Petersen, who's been out of the game for a while. I think he's pretty enjoying his cushy job. I think he's with Fox, right?
He's on the Fox college football desk.
I don't think he wants to coach anymore, right? I think there's sort of this like, I'm fine talking about football, not having to deal with all this money, because he didn't deal with the NIL, the transfer portal. He was done coaching by the time that started happening.
Right.
So you need someone who could deal with the academic standards, and you need someone who's going to entice recruits. So I have a list here. We'll go through them, Spencer. Number one on my list, and it's a little weird because this is where they got Troy Taylor from, Sacramento State, right? This is the risky young hire. This is Brennan Marion. He's the innovator of the go-go offense. He made Kenny Pickett a first-round pick, Jordan Addison, Blitnikoff winner. And then he went to UNLV and led them to almost playoff contention, right, with Matthew Saluto.
Oh, no, 2 years in a row. I mean, UNLV has been in the Mountain West Championship game. Right,
and so he helped that, right? And so it's his first head coaching job right now at Sac State, and he's recruiting quite well. He's landed commits, not signed. He's landed commits from a few of their highest-ranked recruits in program history. He's cool, he's young, and I think being at a bigger program broadens his net in terms of recruiting. So Stanford may see a recruiting uptick with him. I look at Will Stein at Oregon. Like we talked about, you could just name any young up-and-coming offense coordinator because Stanford needs that excitement. Oregon doing pretty well for themselves, right? They were the Big Ten champs in year one. They had really good quarterbacks in Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel. Dante Moore is at the helm this year, and there are kind of rumors that he's going to be maybe the best of them all, right? So Will Stein is an offensive mind. And then you look at, and this is where people get confused by this, Jeff Monken, the Army head coach, right? You hear this and you go, triple option. One, he kind of backed off the triple option. Two, you have to find someone who understands the academic rigors. And the Army head coach, Ken, I don't want to butcher his last name, at San Jose State, the former Navy coach, those guys deal with these academic rigors at the service academies because you have to get a letter of recommendation. I think it's from a senator. You have to have a certain GPA. You have to be like a perfect candidate for the schools. So he'd get that. And Army did really well last year. And then my out of the box thought would be Jeff Traylor at UTSA. Now he's been linked to every major head coaching job. So I don't know if Stanford would be the one where it makes him leave Texas. But if you're Stanford, you got to get creative. And I think that's what Andrew Luck is there for, because he was creative enough he was on the board that found Troy Taylor. So he has to be creative again.
Man,
March. I don't envy this decision.
I don't either. I don't either. I don't think they're in a hurry to make a hire before this spring portal window. I'd be shocked if that comes about, but I think they're going to monitor the college football season and say, hey, whose name's popping up? Who's hot? Who do we want to get? Who could we get? Who's a fit? All that sort of stuff. Colorado, though, thinks JuJu Lewis is a fit. Well, he could have fit a lot of places. I think he could fit right into the starting job in Boulder. First, this episode brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. If you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your order. That's supplyhouse.com. Should JuJu Lewis just start at Colorado? That's the way I see it. Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs is here. Do you see it that way, Kevin? I look at Kaidon Salter, and he's capable. If you want to start him for a couple games, let JuJu learn a couple things, sure, that's fine. But is this a quarterback battle? Is this Salter's job? I just don't look at Kaidon Salter as someone who's going to take this year's Colorado team and push them to a Big 12 championship game. So therefore, play the long game if you're Deion Sanders.
Yeah, that's a risky move, right? I think everyone's instant mindset is to go, he's a 5-star. He didn't go to Colorado to sit the bench. And let me tell you, history doesn't always say that, right? Trevor Lawrence didn't start right away. Bryce Young didn't start right away. He sat behind a guy named McCorkle, right? McCorkle Jones started over Bryce Young. Arch Manning at Texas.
Mac Jones, for those of you who don't remember
that.
Yeah.
Right, back up to Brock Purdy now for the 49ers. Arch Manning didn't start right away. Quinn Ewers didn't start right away, right? There's a lot of instances of blue chippers, 5-star guys not starting right away and being okay, right? Then we got Dylan Raiola, who burst onto the scene a little bit last year, and then he fizzled. And it was rough because it's like, okay, do you bench your 5-star freshman and absolutely kills confidence, or like, what do you do? So I think you ride with Kaidon Salter. You have to change your offense up entirely because you don't have Shedeur. Kaidon Salter is one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in college football. I think you're hoping if you're Colorado, you get that 2023 version of him, the Conference USA guy, or Conference USA MVP guy, who could do a little bit of everything. And I wouldn't want to ride with Julian right out of the way or right out of the gate, because if it doesn't work out, then you just killed his confidence, right? I think it's better for everyone involved. You ride with the veteran. If he does well, perfect, then Julian can learn from him. If he doesn't do well, then Julian sat behind him, learned from his mistakes, and can hop into the lineup if needed.
So I hear you on that front, Kevin, but if you're Nebraska, which is a great example, would they go back in time and not start Dylan Raiola because he struggled the second half of the season? Or do you think they benefit not just in that season, but also this upcoming season because he played the whole year and led them to a bowl game? I mean, the upside for JuJu Lewis, if he's able to get acclimated quickly, now they have an early non-conference battle with Georgia Tech. That's a potential ACC dark horse. Maybe you don't want to throw him into the fire for that particular game. I just wonder if they don't look at that situation or others like it and say, hey, yeah, you have a veteran that he can learn behind. I get that trajectory. I just think that without Shedeur and Travis Hunter, so much is changing for this Colorado team. I don't know what foundation realistically Kaidon Salter can establish that it would be worth taking playing time away from JuJu and therefore his development.
Yeah, there's a couple points I want to hit there, right? I like the question, would Nebraska like flip their script, right? Would they be like, you know what, now that if we looked into the future, saw he was going to struggle, lose however many straight, would we change it? I'd also like to point out Nebraska's backup quarterback now plays tight end. So there's a different level. There's a different level of like quarterback competition here, Colorado, Nebraska. So I get the sentiment, but I think it's a little different, right? Kaidon Salter, in theory, is one of the more proven quarterbacks in the portal, at least, right? I don't know if he's going to be 2023 or 2024 version of himself, but I think he has a higher ceiling than what Nebraska's backup was. That being said, Spencer, has Colorado's offensive line been good?
No.
Okay. Julian Lewis, he's 17 years old, right? We're going to hear a lot of he's 17. He should be a senior.
Did you know that Ryan Williams was 17 last year?
I didn't. I honestly.
Now you know, Kevin.
Right.
Now you know.
Could have taken a shot every game they said that. You probably would be blacked out by the end of the game.
You would have been in the hospital.
They're like, look at that 17-year-old over there, just standing there drinking water. But realistically, he should be a senior in high school next year. So it's like you don't want to rush him into that. Also, you don't want to rush him into a death trap if that offensive line isn't good. And Kaidon Salter, I made this point earlier, he's mobile AF, right? He's one of the best dual threats in the country. So if the offensive line isn't good, which they brought in 4 or 5 new guys again, shocker, and say 4 or 5 new guys don't mix well again, shocker. It could, though. I liked who they brought in, but I don't know if it's going to work. We thought they were going to work last year, and they didn't. I think Kaidon Salter is better suited to survive the circumstances. And I just don't like putting all the pressure and hopes on Julian Lewis because it's like let me ask you this question. Julian Lewis gets a starting job, right? And we'll just pretend for S&Gs he starts the whole year and they go 6-6. Like, what is the vibes around Julian Lewis? Are we getting bus talk? Are we getting like, this guy sucks? Like, what are we thinking?
If he steps in as a true freshman and goes 6-6, I'd look at him the same way I saw Raiola last year, which is, man, this guy is a mega talent, and going 6-6 as a true freshman is hard. I mean, you don't see a lot of true freshmen starting. Bryce Underwood, for goodness sake, probably won't start at Michigan. They'll probably go with Mikey Keene, the Fresno State transfer, who I think is fine. I just think that these two situations are kind of similar where you're playing a veteran, and I understand why. Like, you make a lot of really good points. I understand why they go down that road. I just don't know what exactly you're playing for. You know, if you bring in a guy, and they're both going to have short leashes. I mean, it's going to be a short leash. And how often does that, when you don't have high ceiling veterans that are there, and I think Salter's ceiling is fine. I think Mikey Keene's ceiling is also fine. I don't think either one is leading you to a conference championship in the Big 10 or Big 12 respectively at the G5 ranks. Sure, I don't think in those conferences. So when you don't have that high ceiling, that's where I wonder, should you just go with the young guy? Because you're probably going to, it's the Michael Penix and the Falcons situation. Like, wow, you brought in Kirk Cousins, but you drafted Penix. Well, how quickly is everyone going to call for Penix to start once Kirk Cousins struggles? Oh, look at that. Cousins didn't make the season. And now it just feels like you had this weird in-between wasted sort of year. And on the Nebraska point you made earlier, I did want to bring up one factor, which is I think Nebraska committed to starting Dylan Raiola, and that's why they didn't have a good backup plan. If they had wanted a plan like this where you play a veteran until the young guy's ready or you sit him for an entire year, whichever one you want to do, I think that they would have gone out and found a more serviceable backup who has a higher floor. Those guys were out there in the portal. I don't think Nebraska would have been lacking for the ability to find somebody like that. But I think that whole dynamic, it's all over the country this year, really. Yeah. Like everywhere you look, every conference, there are a lot of schools where you go, do you play the young guy or are you going with this guy? I mean, you've got quarterback questions at Alabama that I talked about on yesterday's show. You've got quarterback questions all over the ACC.
Ohio State, right?
Ohio State quarterback questions. Like, Oregon's not 100% locked into Dante Moore. They probably are, but that's not a guarantee. That hasn't been formally announced. But, Borba, I want to get you out of here on this. Colorado's looking to, I don't know what this year. As I mentioned, I don't know what they're going to try to do. We'll just kind of see how it plays out. But for them to hit their ceiling, which transfer has to be at his absolute best?
Like, which transfer addition? Oh, gosh, that's a good question. Honestly, I think we go back to who we've been talking about this whole time. The easy answer is Kaidon Salter, right? I think you lose Shedeur Sanders, who people may not want to give him credit for whatever reason. I think we know the reason. Right, not you, but like other people's. And people won't give him the credit. Shedeur Sanders was working miracles behind those offensive lines, right? I don't know if they would have been able to block Spencer. Honestly, those offensive lines gave up. He was sacked 94 times in 2 years.
It's
right?
just it's unconscionable.
Like, I don't even know. I bet you there's quarterbacks in this draft who weren't sacked 90 times in their career.
By the way, Washington last year gave up the most sacks in the Big Ten, 39. Yeah, not even half of what Shedeur was sacked in 2 years.
He had a better offensive line, was sacked 40-something times. So not great, right? So I think you have to go Kaidon Salter. Big shoes to fill. In terms of a non-quarterback answer, I'm looking at Joseph Williams, and he's a name that's getting overlooked a lot right now. But he's their wide receiver one, or he should be their wide receiver one. Came in from Tulsa, was an American Freshman of the Year, Rookie of the Year, whatever they want to call that award. You lose Travis Hunter, who, granted, again, you're losing 2 players in one, but their corners are set. They're losing Travis Hunter, Will Shepard, Jimmy Horn, and LeJontay Wester. That's 4 NFL-ish caliber receivers, right? And so now you're turning to Amarion Miller, who has had like 2 great games, and he just disappears off the face of the earth after, which one of them he got hurt. Draylon Miller, who's a sophomore, redshirt freshman, depending on how much he played. And that's it, right? You have little to no experience. So Joseph Williams is kind of like the guy at wide receiver where it's like, hey, we need you to be our guy. Otherwise, our offense does not have a guy at receiver. I'm sure other guys could step up, but I'm looking for him.
Kevin Borba, Locked On Bus. Great stuff today. And speaking of 5-star quarterbacks, 2026 class, they've got those too. And Jared Curtis, he's down to 2 schools. And we've got a date. So what happens now for the number 1 quarterback? First, this episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. All-in-one convenience is great in every facet of your life. That's true for money as well. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. monarchmoney.com.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Oh, massive news yesterday. Huge news for Jared Curtis, the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2026. We know which day he's going to commit. Brian Smith, longtime recruiting guru, joining me here on the show, also host of Locked On, the portal on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So this has kind of become the norm, hasn't it, Brian, that we latch on to kids' social media accounts. There was a countdown clock on Jared Curtis's Instagram story, and everyone was waiting, what's going to happen? What's it going to be? And he was announcing a commitment date of May 5th for arguably, and in my view, the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2026. So let's just go right to the point. This is down to Oregon and Georgia. He's made that clear for quite a long time. Do you think between now and then that list could expand?
It's possible. I doubt it because remember now, he committed to the Dogs originally, very, very early. I highly doubt from being around Jared that he wants to do this 3 times. So he's probably narrowed it down to those 2. And barring a coach randomly this spring leaving either Georgia or Oregon, I think it'll be those programs. The only way this changes down the line, again, coaches. As we always talk about here on the show when I come on, kids pick coaches, not schools, more often than not. So if a coach leaves one of those programs and he's committed to them later, that's all bets are off. But I highly doubt that's going to happen at UGA or Oregon at this point. So Ducks or Dogs.
Yeah, Ducks or Dogs, which is, we'll call it mildly ironic, given that Dan Lanning is Kirby Smart's protege, since he was his defensive coordinator over there before getting the head coaching job with the Ducks. But obviously between now and May, those 2 staffs are full court press into getting Jared Curtis. Now, the interesting thing is both have been tied at one point or another to other quarterbacks in the 2026 cycle as well. Georgia had a visit from an Oklahoma commit. Oregon has been tied to Ryder Lyons, who's looking at a variety of schools, mostly West Coast based, but others have gotten in the mix like Michigan as well. So between now and May 5th, what are these staffs doing to try to get him to pick their school on that day?
I think it's just reiterating why they wanted him in the first place and why that Oregon is the place or Georgia is the place. If you really deviate course at this point, it's not going to work. His camp and the people around him were too smart for that. So I don't look for any shenanigans or anything unique. You just got to pitch who you are and pitch culture and pitch relationships. There is no special elixir here. I hope that he figures it out, because it's probably gut-wrenching to figure, where am I going to spend the next 3 or 4 years of my college career at, try to get the NFL and all that. And hopefully it is early May and he doesn't have to back up the date, but I really don't think it's going to change all that much.
So you've covered recruiting for a long time. In your experience talking to coaches with this stuff and trying, to get players to commit and whatnot, how often do you talk to a kid? How often do you just text him? How often do you call him? Do you try and get him out on another visit? Do you think that will happen? Like, now that you have this window of, just over a month to try to get a kid to pick your school who you've already developed a relationship with over the last couple of years, what is it like for those staffs between now and then?
Well, Georgia's got the one edge that they're closer. If he wanted to take a trip, he can get in his car. But I think he's been to Georgia enough times. I really don't think going to Athens is going to make much of a difference either. So I don't really know if there's anything other than just constant communication. Georgia and Oregon have done a great job just to get in the final two. So continue with that. And maybe it's somebody else on the staff reassuring him of why they can be a difference in him. Maybe something small like that. Because this is one of those too close to call kind of recruiting races, which is fun, by the way. But I don't think you're going to fool him again. It comes back to that. Anything that's unusual with how you recruit him this point forward probably is going to be an albatross for you. So Kirby's experience, Dan's experience, they obviously know each other because they've worked together. This is really unique recruiting. It's unusual to see this from a West Coast school and a Georgia school that know each other like this. But Jared's got a tough decision ahead of him, because I just think they're going to pound the phones, call him occasionally, but there's not going to be anything outside the box.
Well, and one thing that also makes it intriguing is he's from Tennessee. You've got Oregon and Georgia going after the top quarterback, and he's from the state of Tennessee. First question that pops in my mind when I think about that, Brian, how did the Vols not get into a closer final list here?
Faison Brandon is the kid they decided they wanted. They wanted somebody a little more mobile, and he's a freak. And he decided to commit very, very early. Some people got Brandon ahead of him. It just depends on the style of offense you want to run. I don't know if it was also a selection of these guys are both elite. Faison Brandon will make a decision earlier. We want the first option. That might have been it. I don't know. But I'm sure at some point he had a conversation with them. But I really don't remember Tennessee being a major player. Maybe it's just because Brandon fit their program quicker. I'm not sure, but it is unusual. You think of Nashville, it's like, it's probably a pretty easy pick for the Tennessee Vols, but it was always Faison Brandon.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with what you just said is that I don't look at Jared Curtis and think of him as an immobile guy. Now, he's not, running around there like Jalen Milroe, where he's, borderline running quarterback, but I don't watch his film and say, oh, he's just going to sit in the pocket and slice and dice. You're like, no, he moves well. He can make plays on the run. I mean, he's 6'4", 6'5", in that sort of range, 220, 230. He could bulk up even more. I mean, I've always looked at him and saw Josh Allen. That's what I think of when I look at Jared Curtis. And, the power schools let Josh Allen slip through the cracks one time, and he wound up at Wyoming. I don't think that's ever going to really happen again.
Yeah, that was a really unusual circumstance. I don't know what it is, but unless you've seen Faison Brandon live, it's kind of hard to explain, but they are different quarterbacks. There's an athlete and then there's that. So Jared is more further advanced in terms of his passing acumen, but it's not like Faison Brandon can't swing it too. So it just depends on what you want. This is a great quarterback class. In most years, there wouldn't be much discussion. There's usually a clear guy. There are 3 or 4 guys this year that could be number one, Brandon being one, Curtis being another. But the Ducks, they're lucky to be in on a kid. Again, just them alone. Getting a kid out of Tennessee that's a 5-star is weird for a school on the West Coast. But as I've said on your show many times, for the Ducks, that's kind of their thing. Like, they're random.
Yep.
When it comes to recruiting, and by leaps and bounds. So of any state school, especially, they are the most unusual when it comes to recruiting. So it's fascinating just from that perspective. I don't know where he's going to go, and I'm not sure anybody does, especially since he's not making a quick decision after both of those 4-day visits to Athens and to Eugene. Unfortunately
for the Bulldogs, once again in the offseason, Brian, there are storylines about reckless driving incidents that are popping up, and this is a multi-year issue at this point for Kirby Smart and company, and I hope for his sake and for the sake of everybody down there, he's able to get it under control. But that's a negative headline for the Bulldogs program, and Oregon doesn't have an equivalent of that on the other side. Do you think that sort of news plays into Jared Curtis's decision at all, or is that some guys are just doing some dumb stuff and driving reckless, and I'm not going to do any of that? Like, does that factor into his calculation at all, you think?
For the recruits, as a general rule, the answer is no. The question is, how do the parents feel about it? And that is an internal deal. I know the players you're talking about. I actually spoke to somebody that was part of the recruitment of one of those two guys earlier today. But look, some parents won't allow it. At some point, it's going to hurt Georgia. It's just a matter of which recruiter recruits it is. I can't answer that second part, and that's the critical aspect of it. But yeah, Georgia is going to get hammered with negative recruiting. That is common. It's probably already started. You just can't have guys racing cars and all that stuff, especially after somebody actually died. So will that be a factor? I don't know. And again, Dan used to work with Kirby. That would be a little awkward if they use negative recruiting on that. I don't think that's going to be a part of it, but other schools will. And you don't even have to, because it's all over social media. So it's something to think about. It certainly didn't help Georgia's cause, that's for sure. So we'll see what happens, but I'd love to know the backstory to that after signing day. That's for sure.
That'll do it for today. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.